Hey, what's going on guys? Dan Watson, Learning Cameras, and I've got the new Tamron 18-400mm lens, and this is a lens I had to try out because I'm not one to do super zooms. They just tend to not offer the kind of quality that I'm looking for. However, when you're talking about an 18-400mm range, that really changes things for me. Not because of the vast wide, I think it's like a 22x zoom, which is unbelievably crazy, but not just for that, but for getting anything 400 millimeters is pretty crazy. Now this is a 1.5x crop, so actually when used on this body, it is a 600 millimeter lens. So something that's pretty much incapable on a full frame without using some massive glass. So this is something that I really wanted to try out just to be able to get that 400 millimeter focal length. And then the advantage of having all of that wide angle too meant this could be really the last zoom lens that you're gonna need. Maybe something that can cover that whole range. And even if it's not the best lens in the world, can be something that if you only had one lens to take out with you, this is gonna be it. And so I really wanted to take a look at this lens and see what it offers. So, but don't let me kind of show you everything about it. We're gonna take a look at the images and you can see for yourself. Now, I've also made all these images available to download, so check the description below for links to do that, and you'll see some other stuff down there as well. But I want you to be able to download these, check them out yourself, and take them into your editor and see what you can do with it. Now, I will have the Nikon D7500 review coming right up, so subscribe if you have not already, and then once I have that review, I'm gonna leave it in the description below as well, so check that and see if you see that Nikon D7500 review. But without further ado, let's take a look at these images, and then we'll talk about this lens a little bit. So first, let's talk about the hardware of this lens, some of the characteristics about it. At just over 1.5 pounds, it is a little on the heavy side for a typical zoom for these cameras, something like the Nikon. This is the 18-140. And this is kind of your typical decent zoom lens for these kind of crop sensor bodies. It's kind of intermediate price, not super good quality, but not bad at all. Now these are a little bit lighter than you'll find with this one. So a 1.5 pounds, it's about in between something like this and then something like this. I wanted to give you that comparison. Now, as far as your actual size, it is very close when it's in its zoomed out stage to something like this lens. So not a whole lot more than what you'd be looking for on a typical zoom lens. However, you telescope this thing out and you're looking more like 7200 style. So almost doubling the body size on that one. Now 18-400mm is f3.5 to 6.3. It does quickly close down that aperture. So anything over 200 millimeters is basically at that 6.3 aperture. At 6.3, it's about a third stop more than some of the other zoom lenses. Like this will top out at 5.6. So you're losing a little bit of light on there, but not a whole lot. It does have vibration compensation on this one, so you do have image stabilization. I'll talk about that a little bit more. You do have a lock mode as well, because with a lot of zoom range like this, you might want to lock that. However, I did not find that there's any kind of creep on this thing. It seems to be pretty secure. There is a point right around the 70 millimeter mark that it gets a little bit tough to turn, and then it gets easier beyond that. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not as smooth as you would think. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that your manual focus ring is actually locked down. It's not free. And so if you have this thing in autofocus, it is not going to be turnable. And actually when you're focusing, that will turn, and you pop this into manual focus and then you're going to have that override. It's a pretty short throw as well. Now it is mostly a plastic design, but it's a very, very good quality. And I will say that Tamron's new design language for their lenses looks really nice, really sharp. It looks and feels like a high quality lens, even if this is kind of in that middle price range for what you're getting on this. Now it's $650. It's not cheap. It's going to be more than something like this, but for what you're getting as far as your zoom range, that's pretty incredible to be able to shoot about 200 to 400 millimeter range on something at that price range. And again, if this can replace 2 zoom lenses, then you're really talking about a price savings on this one. But it all depends on how it looks, and that's where things are a little bit interesting. The good news is that overall, the images look very good. Bokeh is really nice, the depth of field, the way that it changes between your focus areas and not focus, it just overall looks really, really good. It's a smooth tone, smooth backgrounds on this thing. And there is some chromatic aberrations, so keep that in mind, but really I don't care about that much because we can correct that in software just a little bit. And overall, it just is a very pleasing lens. Not quite as much contrast as I would like to see, but I mean, for what you're getting and what this is, it was actually a lot better than I thought. And so overall, the images from this thing look really, really nice. Of course, anytime you're dealing with these super zooms, you're gonna have some sharpness issues, and we do kind of run into that. I will say that on the wider side is where this thing excels, and really starting, maybe not at 18 millimeters, but about 35 millimeters, all the way to about that 200 millimeter mark. Things look pretty good. I mean, you won't wanna be pixel peeping on this thing too much, but for most uses, you're gonna be very, very pleased with the results. Overall, I thought this was performing exceptionally well considering the zoom range and focal length that you're getting on this. Between 35 and 200 millimeters is very good. 18 millimeters is good. Now, when we get into the 400 millimeters, that's where things get a little bit interesting. As long, you're probably not gonna wanna be pixel peeping as much. There's still enough detail that you will not notice this until you start zooming in to 100%. But at that point, they begin to fall apart just a little bit. However, for most of your shots that you're posting to the web, even if you're printing out something that's 16 by 20 or below, you're not gonna notice it. The overall quality of the image is good. And if you're shooting this at f6.3, it's not bad at all. And if you can bump that up to f8 or more, you're gonna notice that this lens kind of really gets into that zone and is sharp enough to be usable for some nice high quality print work. Even distortion on this thing is really well controlled. I mean, you'll see it at 18 millimeters, but compared to most lenses like this, it just is barely there. You'll see also a little bit of 400 millimeters, but again, it's just nothing really to write home about. And vignetting as well. I mean, you'll see it at 18 millimeters, but honestly, it's very easy to take out in software. It really is not affecting my photos that much at all. Now, one thing that wasn't working quite as well for me is going to be the image stabilization. And at first I thought I might have an issue with it. From 200 millimeters and on, it just wasn't giving me enough vibration compensation, I thought. Now, when I looked at the actual specs for this lens, it only calls out about 2 stops of vibration compensation. I would say that is about all I was able to get out of it, which is a little disappointing on a super zoom like this, when sometimes we can get as many as 4 stops. And then also specifically on the Nikon D7500 and other cameras, it could be better. But on this one, I did feel like I was fighting it just a little bit. As I would hold it up to my eye, I would be able to see some, it kind of skipping around and jumping quite a bit. And I was worried that those jumps could be taking place as I was taking the image. And there were some images that I took that were at a sufficiently high shutter speed that should have been perfect. And I did notice a little bit of motion in those images. And I can't help but possibly attribute that to the vibration compensation system. I do hope it is possibly an update. It could be something due to this camera. You might not have these issues, especially with Canon lenses or Canon cameras and this lens. Nikon has always been a little bit worse for dealing with Tamron and Sigma lenses than Canon has. So if you're with Canon, you might be a little bit safer. But that's what I was noticing on it a lot. I wouldn't say that it was bad. I was still able to get very usable results on that. But with the vibration compensation, I just didn't think that that element of it was as good as it should have been. We got to talk about live view a little bit on this one. This is something that we're using a whole lot more, not just for shooting photos, but also for shooting videos. And it's going to be a little bit different depending on the camera that you're putting this on. I'm using a Nikon D7500 mostly for this one. It does perform a little bit better with Canon, but let's talk about some of the things on that one. The first is going to be autofocus. The good thing is that the autofocus motor was actually pretty quiet, not quite Canon STM lens quiet, but good enough to compete with most of your other lenses and as quiet as something like this. Nikon has never been great at using live view and autofocus, and that's not going to change and not going to be better with this lens, especially at your longer focal lengths. I did find that I was able to get a little better performance with something like this, even at similar focal ranges. However, I've been using Tamron lenses quite a bit on my Canon with dual pixel autofocus, and I haven't had any issues with that. So I do think if you're a Canon shooter, you're going to be good to go. And it's really just because Nikon system is contrast only, and it really has it struggles quite a bit in live view with autofocus, even on this camera right here. and using Nikon glass is going to make it a little bit more usable, but overall I found the performance was kind of lacking no matter what I was using, and so I wouldn't attribute too much of that to the lens itself. So overall, the big question is, should I buy this lens? And overall, I'm gonna have to say yes, and especially if you are a Canon shooter. If you're a Canon shooter, the vibration compensation has been working a little bit better, and the autofocus is gonna work a little bit better in your live view modes. And so for you, getting this kind of range out of a $650 lens that overall performs extremely well, and sure, you're not gonna wanna pixel peep at 100%, especially at 400 millimeters, but the overall quality of the images was very, very good. Now, if you're a Nikon shooter, I did feel like I was fighting that vibration compensation. So that is my only thing that really held me up. And again, the focus system is going to be a little more limited in live view, but I really didn't find it was a whole lot worse, and it's just not a typically good system with any lens, even Nikon lenses. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. You're probably used to not relying on the autofocus system in live view too much anyway if you're a Nikon shooter. So overall, man, 18-400 millimeters is just crazy to be able to get that kind of focal range. I was able to get shots that I would never have gotten if this was the lens I had on me. Even if I had the space for something like this, this is just not a lens that would have given me the results that I was able to get at 400 millimeters. And so it seems like a great lens to buy. I highly recommend it. If you need to, check out the links below. For the build quality you're getting, also, man, check this out. You do even have gaskets on here, so that's really nice to see some level of weather sealing on a lens like this. Overall build quality that I think is above the price point and above your typical lenses like this that you would get for your kit. So check that out. Again, download the images, see for yourself. All of those are going to be available, links below. Check those out, stay tuned. Check out this camera review, it's going to be really, really cool. Whole bunch more. I'm taking a trip right now, so stay tuned. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook. Appreciate the like and the subscribe. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate it. So stay tuned. Whole lot more to come. Thanks for watching.